Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Rabbi.
No, it's good. This Shabbos, we don't again have the reading of the parsha. I mean, actually, the next parsha is Parshas V'zayis Habracha, the last parsha of the Torah, and that we're not going to read on Shmini Atzeres. We're going to read it on Simchas Torah. On this coming Shabbos, we're going to be reading from the section of the Torah that we read for festivals, which is from the book of Devarim, Parshas Re'eh. And before we read from the Torah, we're going to read from something else. We're going to read the book of Kohelet. You know, there are the five Megillas, the five Megillas of the Tanakh. One of them is Kohelet. In English, it's called Ecclesiastes. Don't ask me why, but that's what it's called in English. The book of Kohelet. Kohelet was written by Shlomo HaMelech, by King Solomon. And in Kohelet, he goes through every aspect of our physical lives, and he shows how they are not to be seen as a goal unto themselves, but rather, as he says at the very end of Kohelet, that the main thing is to fear God, and that everything that we do in life has to lead towards that being in awe and love of Hashem. And the book of Kohelet is read on Sukkot because, as we mentioned before, Sukkot in Israel was the time that everything had been gathered in, everything had been harvested, everything was brought into the silos, and it was a kind of situation where you can feel very proud of yourself for all your accomplishments, your physical accomplishments, your material accomplishments, and therefore read the book of Kohelet to tamper that down, to humble us, not to make too much of a fuss about our material successes, about our worldly successes, but to focus on our spiritual successes and our worldly successes to be used in the service of Hashem. So that's what tonight's focus is going to be on the book of Kohelet, and specifically Kohelet Yud Aleph, chapter 11, Pasuk Aleph, Pasuk 1. And that pasuk reads like this: Shlach lachmacha al pnei hamayim. Literally translated, it means throw your bread on the face of the water, or cast your bread on the face of the water. Ki b'roiv hayamim timtzeenu, because in many days you will find it. What does that mean? Sounds like if you go in and throw something in the water, right? It floats away. But sometimes, eventually, because of the way the water flows, it may come back to you. So the pasuk is reading, Shlach lachma pnei hamayim, send your bread upon the water, because in many days you'll find it. Now, clearly, he's not telling you to throw bread on the water, but rather it's meant to be it's a parable for something. It's meant to be a message for something. And Rashi explains like this: Shlach lachmacha pnei hamayim, asay tova v'chesed la'adam, do kindness, do a favor to a person, that your heart says to you when you're going to do him the favor, you're never going to see this guy again. Like a person who throws his bread, his food into water. You know, typically, if you throw your bread into the water, what's going to happen to it? It's going to be gone. So this is meant to be a metaphor to someone who is about to do somebody a favor. Now, if I do a friend a favor, at the end of the day, in the back of my mind, I can say to myself, you know, I'll do him a favor today. He'll do me a favor tomorrow. You know, these are things that, whether we realize it or not, even subconsciously are going on in our minds. Then there's somebody who, like, you don't even know who the guy is. You're just a complete stranger. Comes over to you and he asks you for a donation. Okay, comes over after you for a donation. Okay, you know, he seems to be a person who's in need. I can believe that he's in need. Many times nowadays they come with letters that kind of, they get letters to say that they're legitimate, they're not fakers or anything like that. And you're going to give him, you're going to give him a donation. You're going to help him out. But your heart says to you, says Rashi, I'm never going to see this guy again. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I'm giving my money, I'm giving what I have. and I'm giving it away, and I'm never going to see anything back from it. It seems to be it's a natural thing that goes through our minds. So Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon said, "Shlach lach mocha pnei hamayim." Throw your bread on the water. That means when you think to yourself that this kindness I'm going to do to the person is basically, in Yiddish we call it areis gavar von Geld, throwing away money. Now again, you understand there's a mitzvah, but in some way there's a certain hesitancy on your part. You're not going to do it wholeheartedly because you're saying to yourself, I'm never going to see, I'm giving away this money, I'm never going to see it again. So Shlomo HaMelech said, "Shlach lach mocha pnei hamayim." Send your bread cast your bread onto the water. Ki b'roiv hayamim timse'enu. Because b'roiv yamim, in many days, at a later point, timse'enu, you're going to find it. Oid yamim bayim u'tekabel tashlemcha. Days will come and you will get your payment back for that kindness that you did. King Solomon promised us. King Solomon, his wisdom and his greatness, told us, if you think that when you're going to do a chesed, do a kindness, it's going to be thrown away money, no. You may not see it right away. You may not even probably realize it sometimes. But the payment, the payback, the reward is going to come. It's going to come to you. Cast your bread upon the waters. Do that kindness that appears to you like you're taking your money, you're throwing it away. You're never going to see anything from it again. Do it. Because in many days, at a future time, the payment will come back. Now, it's interesting to note, right, that, from Pirkei Avos, we learn that you shouldn't do a mitzvah for the purpose of reward, right? The higher level is to do a mitzvah for the sake of doing Hashem's will, not looking for reward. But King Solomon in the book of Kohelet, I would assume, wanted to be very practical, and he wanted to address what goes on in people's minds and people's hearts. And he said, listen, even if it looks like you're throwing away your money, now it's a mitzvah, but I'm not going to get anything back from this. And the truth is, when you do the mitzvah, you shouldn't be thinking about getting something back from it. But your heart says something to you. Your subconscious, something inside of you tells you you're never going to get anything back for this. And again, you may not stop from doing it. It's a mitzvah. Of course I'm going to do it. You're not going to do it wholeheartedly. And King Solomon said, realize the payment is going to come back for what you did. And Rashi continues. Here's Rashi's proof. Here's Rashi's illustration from the Torah to this point. Re'ema nemar b'Yisrael. See what was said by Yisro. Who is Yisro?
This is father-in-law.
Moshe Rabbeinu's father-in-law. Now we know that the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu had to run away from Egypt, and he ran to a place called Midian, right? Mm-hmm. And in Midian, he went to a well, and these girls came to water the sheep, and they were driven away by other shepherds, and Moshe saved them. When they came home to their father said, wow, things went pretty quick today. And then they told him the whole story. Ish Mitzri Hitzalanu, an Egyptian man saved us. So what does Yisro say? Kirin Leiv Eloi Chalechem. He just left him there. Bring him here, though, and we'll give him something to eat. That's what he said, right? Now, Rashi says, Re'ema nemar b'Yisro. See what is said by Yisro. Kirin Leiv Eloi Chalechem. Call him and give him and Kirin Leiv Eloi Chalechem. Call him and he'll eat bread. This is what Yisro said. Rashi continues, V'savar shehu Mitzri. Yisro thought it was this Egyptian man, right? You're not going to see him again. Mahaya b'Seifai. What happened at the end? What's the end of the story? What's the end of the story?
He comes to the motion when they go from Mitzrayim.
So what happens is, as Rashi says, Nasa Chasnoi, this Egyptian man becomes his son-in-law, Umelech al Yisrael, the king of the Jewish people. Interesting way of describing Moshe, the king of the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu brought him into conversion, which Yisro did, even though he went back to Midian. And the descendants of Yisro were those who sat in the chamber of the Sanhedrin, of the highest court of the Jewish people at the Beis HaMikdash. So here we have it. Yisro invites this man, this Egyptian man, to kind of pay him back for his favor. And he pays him back for the favor. He says, bring him in. Let's give him something to eat. Yisro thinks he's a Mitzri. Yisro never imagines. He thinks he's just going to go on his way. Nope. What happens at the end is he stays. He marries his daughter. He becomes the leader of the Jewish people. Yisro converts, and his descendants are from the greatest Torah scholars of the Jewish people. So Rashi says, there's your example. That's your illustration of cast your bread upon the waters. And eventually, and the time will come when your reward will come back. Rashi uses that as the example. Now it's interesting, when you hear this kind of example, and you say that, look, Moshe Rabbeinu just invited Yisro just invited Moshe for the purpose of feeding him, and look everything that came from it. So some people might say to themselves, "Okay, that's nice. That's nice. That's a nice thing." Okay, some people would use the word, it's a coincidence, all right? Is this something to go ahead and build this whole idea from? But Rashi says yes. Rashi says that we have to see what happened there by Yisro in the light of what Shlomo HaMelech is telling us here in Kohelet. That when you do a favor to someone, you should know a time will come. Again, Rashi, the word is in many days. And Rashi says, days will come. We don't know how long it's going to take, but you'll receive your reward. And actually, will you actually see the reward? You may not. Sometimes we get to see it. Sometimes we don't get to see it. But the pasuk is saying, as the pasuk is telling us, be sure, know that the reward will come for your kindness. You think that you're doing this kindness to a person, you'll never see him again, and there'll never be anything back from it. King Solomon was trying to again deal with what goes on in our heart and the hesitancy that we may have in doing this. Even if we do it, we won't do it wholeheartedly. And he tells us, do it wholeheartedly. There's no such thing as a kindness that doesn't have, that you don't reap a reward from it. You don't reap a benefit from it. So I'm going to share with you a story. Okay. You'll forgive me if you've heard the story from me before, but I just think it's an unbelievable example of this whole concept. So the story goes about a man, we'll call him David. I'm getting this here. I have this story here from a book called Small Miracles, and the book calls the star of the story, a man calls him David Brody. He lived in Montreal and he used to do business in New York. And he decided, any time that he had to go into New York for business a lot. He didn't want to fly. He drove. All right, Montreal to New York. How many hours? About 7 hours. And, he didn't mind the drive. And he was the kind of person who just drove, got into the car and he just drove. Before he left, he would take a nice long nap, be well rested, right? Have a canister of, have a big coffee next to him. And he went. Okay. So there was one trip where he took his nap, got on the road, started driving. And an hour into the drive, his eyes are closing. He can't keep his head up. It was very strange because he just slept. He just woke up from a nice long nap and he never had this problem. But he had a problem. He had no strength. He couldn't go. He couldn't do it. So he was somewhere in upstate New York and he stops by a gas station. And the person at the gas station is very friendly. He sees a stranger coming in. What can I do for you? How can I help you? And Mr. Brody explains to him that, he is driving to New York. He's trying to drive to wherever New York is trying to get to. And he's just exhausted. He can't keep his head up. He's got to find a place to sleep. Are there any hotels or motels in the area? Man says, sure. I got a whole list of them to give you and their phone numbers. Gives him the numbers, calls all the hotels, motels, booked solid. And the attendant again, and the person at the gas station was very surprised. Like, it's not, there's nothing special seemingly going on. It wasn't tourist season. Okay. So Mr. Brody says to him, how about in a 50-mile radius? Okay. He gets him a phone book and he starts calling 50-mile radius. Every hotel, motel is booked. So out of desperation, this Mr. Brody says, is there maybe some kind of like a school, a college that maybe has some kind of open room in the dormitory, maybe an old age home that maybe has a bed and I'll pay rent for it? So the guy says, you know what? I know someone who takes care of there not far from here. There is a senior citizens home. And I know the person who takes care of it. The owner, his name is Patrick Riley. Again, these are all names made up, but Patrick Riley, I know him. I'm going to call him up. I'm going to ask him if he has any kind of a bed open. Calls him up and he says, yeah, I have a bed open. He can come. We'll charge him something for it. So Mr. Brody was very grateful, and he slept that night in the senior citizens home. And the next morning he pays, and he's about to leave. And he turns around and he says to this Mr. Riley, he says, I'm actually an ordained rabbi. Are there any Jewish patients here that may need some kind of assistance? So Mr. Riley says, it's really funny. Just as you came in here last night, our one and only Jewish patient passed away. And his name was Samuel Weinstein. He was close to 100 years old. He outlived all his relatives. No next of kin, no documentation, not a penny to his name. And, we have to bury him. And there's no Jewish cemetery around here. The closest cemetery is in Albany. And we just figured we'll go to our local Christian cemetery where there's a pauper's field. What a pauper's field is? It's an area for people who can't afford to pay for a funeral. We have sections there, and we're going to bury him there. So when David heard this, he says, that's very nice of you, but this man was Jewish. He would have wanted, I'm sure he would have wanted to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, And he says to him, look, I happened to, instead of bringing my Corolla that I usually drive to Montreal, I brought my station wagon. I have room in the back for a coffin. Would you be willing to release the body to me, and I will take care of it for burial? And they worked it out. There was no next of kin. There was no one there. And they worked it out, and he was able to release the body to David Brody. The coffin was placed in his station wagon, and he was going to drive. Now, the issue was like this. Okay, what now? Again, this man has no money. That means he has to find a Kohelet Kaddish, has to find a burial society that services these kind of people. Okay, he arrives at a burial society in Brooklyn. The person taking care of it says, no, we don't have anything like that. There's a burial society in Queens. Why don't you try there? And in Queens, they said, we don't have anything like that either. But then he remembered that in a section of Manhattan called the Washington Heights, in Upper Manhattan, they have something. I've heard they have such a fund. They have such a fund to take care of people like that. Okay. David comes to Washington Heights. He comes to the office of the Kohelet Kaddish, of the Burial Society, and he tells him the story, and he says, yes, we have such a fund, and we have places on our cemetery for such people. We'll be glad to do it. Years ago, a wealthy Jewish philanthropist in our community was concerned about people who can't afford a burial, and he went ahead and he made a special fund, and he bought burial plots for this purpose. Okay, and we have several plots that are set aside in our cemetery that we use. Everything will be taken care of. Okay, we got to do paperwork, right? You can't do anything without paperwork. So the first question that was asked is, what's the deceased man's name? And Mr. Brody answered, Samuel Weinstein. And the director says, that's a familiar sounding name. And then he did something here very interesting. He says, do you mind if I take a look at the body? And he went out to the car, and he looked at the body, and he came back with tears in his eyes. And he said to David, not only will we be happy to give Samuel Weinstein a plot in our cemetery, we will give him a place of honor. God's ways are indeed mysterious, my friend. The man in the back of your station wagon happens to be none other than the very same philanthropist who originally established the free burial fund here. He will be laid to rest in the cemetery plot he himself purchased. Your journey was long and arduous, Mr. Brody, but through your most commendable efforts, Samuel Weinstein has indeed been returned to his rightful place. He was a man once was wealthy. Eventually, he lost everything. He had nothing. And look what happened. Years ago, he set into motion a chesed, a true chesed, a chesed of taking care of people who, this is what we call chesed shalemis, a chesed that people can't pay back. The people who use the chesed for don't pay back. He set up this fund and these plots of land for people who would need a burial, who can't afford burial, they should have where to be buried. And that's where he himself was buried. I think that is a very good illustration, an excellent illustration of this whole idea. Cast your bet upon the waters. You do a chesed, you do a kindness, and in this case especially, pay back. Got to pay back. But eventually there was, and in the most honorable way possible. Now,
But it is called small miracle.
Yep. Now, you want to hear another story? Or should we go into it? Or should we? Here's another story. I think it's also another very nice story here in the same book. It says there was a Rav in the 1930s. His name was Rabbi Shmuel Shapiro. He was the rabbi of a Polish village called Prochnik. And he had a habit, he had a practice that he used to take long walks along the countryside. And every time that he passed by anybody on his walk, Jew or non-Jew, he said hello. He greeted them. And our sages see that. You should greet people. And our sages see, Jewish or not, anybody comes your way, you should greet them. Okay, so now this Rabbi Shapiro, on his regular walk, used to pass by a peasant whose name was, or I don't know if it was his name, but he was known as Herr Mueller. Herr Mueller. And he would work in his farm as Rabbi Shapiro would walk by. Shapiro would give him a hearty good morning. He'd say, "Good morning, Herr Mueller." And, relation between Jews and non-Jews weren't that great. And this farmer typically just ignored him, but the rabbi persisted until eventually this farmer, realized that the rabbi means it. He means to be friendly. He means to be sincere. And every morning they had this little ritual. The rabbi would say, "Good morning, Herr Mueller." And the farmer would tip his hat to the rabbi and respond, "Good morning." And they did this for many years until the Nazis came to town. And all that stopped. So the rabbi and his family, they were took into a ghetto, eventually moved from one concentration camp to another concentration camp, and eventually they ended up in Auschwitz. And as he came off the train, Rabbi Shapiro noticed that there was a commandant, that everybody who came off the train would stand before him, and either he said rechts or links, right or left. And Rabbi Shapiro didn't take much to see. Right meant you had a chance to live, and left meant you were done. And it was getting closer and closer till it was his turn to face the commandant. And when they come face to face, their eyes locked. And the rabbi went over to him quietly and said, "Good morning, Herr Mueller." That farmer became the commandant it says Auschwitz. I don't know if exactly Auschwitz. I can't tell you all these, different, all the, historical background, but whatever camp this was, right? And whoever was in charge, at least that day, of deciding who is going where, it was this peasant farmer who now became the head of who is deciding that. The rabbi went over to him and said, "Good morning, Herr Mueller." And quietly, the response was, "Good morning, Rabbi." And then Rabbi Shapiro heard, "Rechts," to the right. He said good morning to the man. That's what he did. He said good morning. And it saved his life. Whether it's a kindness, whether it's just a mitzvah, a good deed, and a good deed in the sense of what our sages said, greet everybody. The reward comes. Sometimes we get to see it. Sometimes we don't. But Kohelet teaches us we have that reward. Now, when we read the Torah on Shmini Atzeres, we're going to read from Parshas Re'eh. And when we read, the reading begins, Aser Ta'aser. Just make sure I have it. I say it correctly. Right. No, not yet. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we are. We're going to read on Shmini Atzeres. This comes from Parshas Re'eh and Devarim, and it begins, Aser ta'aser es kol tvuah zarecha, which means Aser ta'aser, you shall tithe, you shall take a tenth of the grain that you plant that comes from your field each and every year. Now we know that the Kohen gets truma. We separate from our new grain. First, for the Kohen, it's called truma. And then from its remaining, we take a tenth, we give it to the Levi. And then after that, we take another tenth. And depending on which year it is, that second tenth is called Meiser Sheni. And the Meiser Sheni, the second tithing, is something that is holy. It's got to be eaten in Jerusalem. So this is, in the simple interpretation, in the basic interpretation of the pasuk, Aser ta'aser, you shall surely tithe the grain of your field. Now, whenever the Torah uses a double wording, Aser ta'aser, which means tenth, tithe you shall tithe, a tenth you shall tithe. Say it's extra. It doesn't have to say it that way. And therefore, our sages say that, given Midrashic interpretation, that Aser ta'aser means Aser, take off a tenth, bishvil shetis asher, so that you'll become wealthy. That means the Torah is telling us that when you separate from your grain what you're supposed to separate and give away, know that the result of that will be wealth. This is something that has the potential for great reward. When you're going out and giving away from your money, from your property for others, the way you're supposed to, or actually even in the pasuk, it's giving away it's giving it away. You're not giving away to others the Meiser Sheni. But the point is that whenever you're our sages mean to say that whenever you're giving away, whenever you're tithing, whenever you're giving away for a mitzvah, that is something, you give away your money for a mitzvah, that's a cause. That'll be a reason for you to become wealthy, to be rewarded with money back. Now, there's a very interesting explanation given by Reb Shimon Shkup. Reb Shimon Shkup was the Rosh Yeshiva, the Grodna Yeshiva, and he explained this idea in the following way. If you have wealth, you have money, and you give away to tzedakah, that means that you know that this money is not mine. Hashem has made me his treasurer. Hashem has given me this money, yes, to take care of myself, and when I have money, and at the same time to use the money to help others. So when a person goes ahead and he shows, and he acts in a way that he shows that, this is my money, the money that I have, I know Hashem has given it to me to serve him with, which means to go ahead and help others with. So that means that I'm a good custodian. I'm a good treasurer. I can take good care of his money. And when a king sees a person is a good treasurer, that when he gives the treasurer the money, he does good things with it. What does the king do? Gives him more. If I see that you're using the money properly, you're doing good things with it, you're doing what I want you to do with it, he gets more. So aser b'shvil shetis asher. When you go ahead and you aser, you tithe, you give away your money for the sake of serving Hashem, know that's a cause for you to gain more money. And the explanation is because when Hashem sees that you are using the money that he gave you properly in the way that he wants you to spend it, to use it, to serve him with, he's going to give you more. He sees you're trustworthy. You know what you're doing. He'll give you more to continue doing the mitzvahs that he wants you to do. It's another idea from what we're reading on Shmini Atzeres about how, again, when we give to others, that this is a cause for us to, again, to be rewarded. And again, we don't try to go ahead and give so that we'll go ahead and get something back for it. But at the end of the day, we see that our sages, the book of Kohelet, our sages have made this clear to us that we should know, that we should understand this. And not necessarily do it for this purpose, but to understand and know that we don't lose out from giving. We don't lose out from it. Because again, whether sometimes we'll refrain from doing it because we're afraid we're going to lose out, and sometimes we won't do it wholeheartedly. So Hashem says, don't worry, you're going to get it back. You'll even get more. It's like I say, sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't see it, but at the end, as Kohelet says, at the end of the day, the payment will be there. Now, I want to conclude with one last thought from Rav Shimon Shkop on this similar idea. So when you're, in the pasuk when it says aser, you're tithing, you're giving away your money. Here it's giving away your grain. When our sages say aser b'shvil asher, tithe so that you'll become wealthy, you'll gain more money. Typically, that's understood in the sense of money. But Rav Shimon Shkop said it's not just about money. It's about any resource that we have. Anything that we have that we share with others, that our sages are telling us, that Hashem is telling us in this double wording, that you should know you're going to get it back. You're not going to lose out from it. You're going to get it back. You're going to be rewarded by getting more. And it explains a very famous Gemara like this, with this idea, in a very novel way. So the Gemara says that, I think it was Rebbe, the sage Rebbe said, I learned a lot from my teachers, from my rabbis. I learned more from my friends. I learned the most from my students. That's what he said. And the typical understanding is that students, friends, students challenge you, right? A rabbi teaches you. Your friends challenge you. Your students challenge you even more. And because they're challenging you, therefore you're gonna gain from their challenging. You're gonna learn the most from them challenging you, because you've got to answer. So you're gonna have to figure out and learn, and you learn it better, you understand it better. Rav Shimon Shkop explained it like this. When you're teaching students, what are you doing? You're sharing your knowledge. You're actually giving up your time. The time that you could have been used for your own studies and your own ability to gain more wisdom, to study more things. You're giving all that up for the students. Okay, so you're giving up from yourself. Hashem says you get back. The reason why you gain the most from your students is because once you are giving of yourself and giving of your knowledge, giving of your resources towards someone, Hashem promises you don't lose from that. Not only don't you lose from that, it says Asher, you become wealthy. You'll gain more from it. On a practical level, we explain it's because they challenge you so much. But here there's another level. There's a spiritual level here that says that Hashem promises. Hashem tells us, you give of your resources, you're gonna get it back and more. That's part of the power of giving. That's part of the power of kindness. You're gonna give up, not just again from your money, but from any resource you have, any ability that you have. You're gonna give that up for others. Hashem says you're gonna get it back plus. So that's one of the very, very important lessons that we have from the book of Kohelet and from the reading that we're going to have, reading of the Torah that we have on Shmini Atzeres, of how important it is that we understand and try to work on wholeheartedly giving from ourselves to others. Because as Kohelet promises us, as our sages in the Medrash here on these words promise us, or like again, as Kohelet says, cast your bread upon the waters. Eventually, it's going to come back. The reward will be there. And like I said, sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't see it. But be assured and don't be worried and be wholehearted and happy when you give to others, because eventually the time will come that the reward from it will arrive. Have a wonderful, tomorrow is Hoshana, it's already tonight Hoshana Rabbah. We switched the class Hoshana Rabbah because as I sent out a message, I hope it went that, I hope it sent out a message, is that, Hoshana Rabbah is the final judgment of what we've been going through. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot were judged on water. Tomorrow's the last day of Sukkot, and therefore the judgment is sealed about water tomorrow. We want to do things to increase our merits in the final judgment, and therefore tonight we went ahead and we pushed the class to Thursday night, so we should learn on this very last day of Sukkot, increase our merits to be able to be sealed for a good year, for all blessings. And again, I wish you all what we say on Hoshana Rabbah is a piska tova, or in Yiddish, a guten kvittel. There is a Kabbalistic idea that the final judgment comes, Hashem sends them in with angels and with little notes. So we wish each other piska tova. You should have a good note on Hoshana Rabbah. And also have wonderful Shabbos and wonderful Yontif. Thank you for listening.
To our students, thank you.